Today, I want to talk about referential theory, also known as denotational semantics. Essentially, this theory suggests that the meaning of linguistic expressions is rooted in their relationship to the external world around us. The core idea here is that language is a way to hook onto reality, representing situations, objects, or events outside of ourselves. When we think about understanding a word, it's not just about an internal idea or concept, but about knowing what that word refers to or applies to in the real world. So, if I say apple, I know the word's meaning by what it denotes, namely, a particular type of fruit out there in the environment. This approach shifts the focus away from internal mental images or private meanings and places the significance of words in the external, observable world around us. It emphasizes that meaning is something publicly accessible, something we can point to and verify externally. In the context of our overall discussion, this perspective helps us understand how language connects us to reality, making communication a shared, external mapping rather than an internal, private process. Let's take a closer look at denotation. Essentially, denotation refers to the stable relationship between a word and the entire class of objects it can correctly refer to. It's like a fixed link that doesn't change from one context to another. In contrast, reference is more of a moment-by-moment act, something speakers perform in specific situations. It's dynamic and depends on the context in which words are used. The theory we're discussing suggests that words get their meaning by acting as symbols for non-linguistic entities, things like people, places, or substances. For example, the word bridge symbolizes a physical structure that connects two points. By tying meaning to real-world objects, this approach tries to break the cycle of linguistic definitions that can become circular. Instead of defining a word through other words, it points directly to something outside language, something concrete. Understanding denotation is important because it helps us see how words relate to the real world, providing a foundation for how language functions as a system of shared meaning. It's a key piece in understanding how language connects us to the world around us. One major advantage of the referential approach is that it follows what's called the principle of compositionality, also known as Frege's principle. This principle basically says that the meaning of a complex expression depends on the meanings of its individual parts and how they are combined syntactically. In other words, the whole gets its meaning from the parts and how they fit together. This explains why language is so productive, meaning we can understand an infinite number of new sentences. For example, once we know what red and tomato mean and how they combine, we can understand phrases like red tomato easily because their referents combine predictably. So, once we understand the extensions, or the real-world references, of each individual word, the meaning of the entire sentence is fully determined by its structure. This is a powerful idea because it shows how our understanding of language is systematic and compositional, fitting perfectly into the overall theme of how meaning works in language. A primary criticism in understanding meaning is that many words have significance but don't actually refer to anything in the real world. For example, linguistic items like conjunctions such as and or but, prepositions like of, and particles like not, very or maybe don't pick out specific entities or objects around us. Instead, they serve grammatical functions, connecting or modifying other words. Now, if we take a strict view that meaning is all about reference, that is, about pointing to specific things in the world, then these kinds of words would be considered meaningless because they don't refer to anything concrete. But intuitively, that doesn't feel right at all. We understand these words and use them all the time, and they contribute to the overall meaning of sentences. This creates a challenge for referential theory, which struggles to explain how these grammatical words contribute to meaning when they don't have a clear referent. They're crucial for the structure and coherence of our language, even though they don't directly refer to anything in the real world. So the key point here is that many words in language are non-referring, but still meaningful, which raises questions about how we understand meaning itself. This is a significant challenge when trying to explain the semantics of language in a straightforward, referential way. Now, let's look at some of the challenges that strict referential theories face, starting with expressions that refer to mythical or impossible entities. For example, think about a unicorn or Santa Claus. If a theory relies on the idea that words only have meaning through their real-world reference, then these words should be meaningless, because there's no actual unicorn or Santa Claus out there. But in everyday language, we clearly understand and talk about them as if they exist, which creates a problem for this kind of theory. This issue isn't limited to mythical creatures. It also applies to future-oriented expressions like World War III, or fictional characters such as Sherlock Holmes. These entities have never existed in reality, yet we still use language to refer to them comfortably and meaningfully. Furthermore, strict referential theories struggle to explain how we talk about lies or counterfactuals, situations where what we say doesn't match the actual world. For example, if I say, "If I had taken the bus, I would have arrived on time," I'm discussing a situation that didn't happen but still makes sense to us. This brings us to our second challenge. How do these theories handle non-existent or imaginary entities? Clearly, it's a significant problem because language is rich with references to things that are fictional, impossible, or hypothetical. And understanding this challenge is crucial because it shows that simple referential approaches aren't sufficient to explain how we actually use language. Let's explore an interesting challenge in understanding meaning. Frege famously pointed out that two expressions can refer to the same thing but still have different meanings. For example, the morning star and the evening star both refer to the planet Venus. Yet, when we say the morning star is the evening star, it's actually informative. It's not a tautology because these two terms carry different meanings, even though they point to the same object. If reference were the only thing that mattered in meaning, these two terms should be interchangeable or synonymous. But they're not, and this highlights that meaning is more complex. We see a similar pattern with definite descriptions like the first president of the U.S. and the husband of Martha Washington. Both refer to the same person, George Washington, but they convey different kinds of information. This brings us to a key point. Even when two expressions have the same referent, they can have different meanings. This is a fundamental challenge in understanding language, and it ties into our broader theme of how meaning works beyond just pointing to objects in the world. To solve these puzzles, Gottlob Frege introduced a really important distinction between two key concepts: Bedeutung, which we can think of as reference, and Sinn, or sense. Reference is about the actual object that a term points to, like the specific person, place, or thing we're talking about. Sense, on the other hand, is the way we present or think about that object. It's the particular mode of presentation in our minds. Frege argued that sense actually determines reference. In other words, the way we present or understand an object influences what that object actually is in our language. He believed that sense provides the criteria, what he called the indispensable hardcore of meaning. That helps us identify the correct referent. This idea is quite powerful because it allows us to make sense of expressions that don't have a real referent, like fictional characters or hypothetical concepts, but still carry meaning through their sense. It also explains how different senses can point to the same individual. Think of the different ways we can refer to the same person or object, yet their senses differ. So the key takeaway here is that Frege's distinction helps us understand how language works, how we can talk about things, even abstract or non-existent ones, by understanding the relationship between sense and reference. So in this slide, we're exploring how some theorists handle the idea of entities that don't actually exist in the physical world. Instead of assuming that referents always correspond to real, objective things, they suggest that these referents might exist in what we call the experienced world, or projected world. What does that mean? Well, it means that language doesn't just point to something out there in reality, but rather to mental representations, versions of the world we hold in our minds. These representations are like mental images or models that we create based on our psychology. So, even if something has no physical existence, like a fictional character or an imaginary concept, we can still refer to it because it exists as a mental construct. This approach is known as the representational approach, and it emphasizes that our ability to talk about the world is actually mediated by these conceptual structures inside our minds. In essence, this idea helps us understand how we can discuss things that aren't physically present or tangible, by thinking of them as representations projected by our psychological processes. It ties into the overall theme of how language connects us to our internal and external worlds through mental imagery and concepts. Modern formal semantics advances the idea of referential theory by focusing on truth conditions. What this means is that to truly understand the meaning of a sentence, we need to know what the world must be like for that sentence to be true. It's not just about definitions or concepts, it's about the conditions under which a statement holds true. This approach employs mathematical models to simulate different situations. These models help us identify the entities involved and the properties they have, which are represented by logical symbols. Think of these symbols as placeholders that stand for specific objects or qualities within a possible world. Meaning, then, is characterized by the relationship between these linguistic symbols and the actual states of affairs in our formal model. So, when we analyze language this way, we're essentially mapping words onto real or possible scenarios. By grounding language in these possible worlds, formal semantics offers a very precise and systematic way to determine whether a statement is true or false. It's like an algorithm that calculates truth values based on how words refer to entities and properties in different situations. This is the core idea behind truth-conditional semantics, the idea that understanding meaning is about understanding the conditions that make a sentence true. It's a powerful approach that connects language directly to the structure of the world through formal, logical tools. The referential theory is really fundamental when it comes to explaining how language functions as a medium for communicating about reality. It emphasizes the idea that words are connected to the world through their references. But it's important to recognize that reference alone doesn't give us a complete picture of how meaning works. In fact, most linguists now see linguistic meaning as a dual-source phenomenon, meaning it requires both reference, our links to the external world, and sense, which involves the internal relationships within language itself. Contemporary semantics often tries to bridge these two approaches: the denotational approach, which grounds meaning in reality, and the representational approach, which focuses on mental representations. Together, these perspectives help us better understand how language conveys meaning, not just by pointing to things in the world, but also through the internal structure of language and thought. So, to wrap up, while the referential theory provides a crucial foundation, it has its limitations. The full picture of meaning involves combining both reference and sense, reflecting how we connect language to reality and to our inner mental frameworks. This integrated view is key to understanding the complex nature of linguistic meaning in our overall discussion.